hello there. This is Caleb Jones, and this is the Alpha Male 2.0 podcast, freedom-focused lifestyle design for men. And one of the things that has happened lately, and it's one of the things I was expecting to happen, but it's happening sooner than I thought it would happen with this coronavirus crisis and this economy and the mismanagement of most of the Western governments handling this crisis and all that fun stuff, is more and more men now are saying to me, hey, I wasn't really thinking about moving out of my country, but since seeing what's happened with this coronavirus and since seeing my government fuck all this up, I'm actually giving a lot more thought to this now. And before, Caleb, when I would read your 5 flags stuff, I would kind of like, whatever, I'm not doing that. But now, I'm kind of thinking, maybe I should move out of my country. Now, before I get into this topic, let me explain something very clearly. I am not recommending that you leave your country. I am not recommending that you move out of your country. Most men listening to the sound of my voice right now probably don't need to do that and probably don't ever want to do that. There's a significant percentage that do, and you should, and I will talk to you in a second. But if you don't want to, you don't have to, provided, this is a big provided you do everything I'm talking about. You build an Alpha Male 2.0 lifestyle, an Alpha 2.0 business and financial structure, an Alpha Male 2.0 relationship and woman life. You must do those things to protect you against your stupid government. And if you live anywhere in the Western world, your government is stupid. I don't care if you live in Canada, Europe, Eastern Europe, United States, Australia, New Zealand. Your fucking government is stupid. It is incompetent. It's becoming more authoritarian. It's also collapsing. And so you need to have those structures in place. So as time goes on and your government does more and more stupid stuff, you'll be protected and you won't have to move out of your country unless you really want to. So sometimes guys will think that, I'm telling everyone in the world to move out of their countries, or I'm even telling everyone in my audience to move out of the country and do something like 5 flags. You don't have to. And if you have no interest in that, that's perfectly fine with me, as long as you build the other Alpha 2.0 structures. Now, here's what you don't want to do. Oh my God. You don't want to stay in your country, stay in your collapsing Western nation, and just behave like a normal beta male. Just get a normal job, a normal corporate job, get your 401k, put money in the stock market, right? Get traditionally monogamously married, crank out 2.3 kids. Oh my God, those men are going to be fucked when the West collapses. They're already fucked now. They're fucked now during coronavirus, and they're going to be more fucked as time goes on, even if the West never collapses. Those guys are screwed. So you don't want to say, I don't have to move out of the country. I'll just stay here and conduct my life business as usual. My God, are you in trouble if you do that? So no. But if you pursue Alpha 2.0 business models and relationship woman models, you'll be fine regardless of your government. If you don't have to leave the country if you don't want to. Now, if you do want to leave, great. And what's really interesting, this is really interesting to me. So a little inside history on my experience with talking to people about moving out of the country. I decided to leave the United States a long, long time ago, somewhere around 2002, 2003, somewhere in there, when I was married the first time. I went to my wife at the time and said, you know what, I think we need to move out of the country in a few years once the kids grow up, because I don't think America is going to be a very nice place to be in 30, 40, 50 years. And so that's when I first started thinking about it, started this process in earnest about 8 years ago. This year is my last year in the United States as a full-time United States resident. As of January 1st, 2021, I will spend most of the year outside the United States, only spending about 3 months within the United States. But this is something I've been working on for a long time. And what's really interesting, and I may have mentioned this before, but I don't think so. Historically, when I would talk to people, friends I know, acquaintances I know, people I work with, clients, people in companies I work with as a consultant, people on the internet, and just random people, and we were talking about what things we were going to do in the future, and I would mention that I was going to move out of the country in a few years, they would be surprised, and they give me this kind of weird look like, what? You're gonna move out of the United States? Really? Oh. And the reaction was like, well, why would you ever want to do that? What a crazy thing to do. What an extreme thing to do. Wow, that's really interesting and very different and kind of weird. That was the reaction I got for many years until 2016. In 2016, people stopped giving me that reaction. What happened in the United States in 2016? The Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton presidential election. And what is very interesting to me is that election finally woke up a lot of normal, everyday, traditional, societally brainwashed people that America was on the wrong path and maybe there was nothing they could do about it, nothing they could do to fix it. So starting in 2016, when I would mention, yeah, I'm moving out of the country in a few years, the reaction instead was, what? Why are you doing that? Really? The reaction instead was, really? Where are you going? Really? When are you leaving? Really? How are you doing that? It was a completely different reaction from Americans. It was a 180-degree difference. As a matter of fact, and I have said this before, when I was talking to Pink Firefly during our OLTR talk, when I was first sitting down with her and giving her the big talk about, hey, if you marry me, if you end up with me, these are the things I'm going to do. And I gave her all the negatives of being married to me. That's what we're going to do in an OLTR talk. You give the woman all the bad things about you that will come up either now or later in the marriage, so you can address them then before you move in with each other instead of after you live with each other and after you have kids, which is what most idiots do. So I rattled off about 5 or 6 bad things about me. And one of the things I said was, look, in 2025, now I upped it to 2021, but back a few years ago it was 2025. In 2025, Pink Firefly, I'm moving out of the country and I'm going, period, no matter what. And if I'm with a woman as a serious girlfriend or wife and she doesn't want to go, then great, I'm leaving without her because I'm getting the fuck out of here. And I'm not changing my mind. It doesn't matter what else happens from now until then. I am leaving the country in 2025. And you would expect, and I expect her to go, oh my God, oh, what, really? Why you got to do that? And do you have to move out of the country? And you know what her answer was? Her response, and she's a normal person. She doesn't know anything about international politics. And she had never traveled outside the United States in her life before that time. So she didn't know anything about any of this stuff. Her answer was, and I quote, you're taking me with you, right? So people have changed their attitudes about this. And that was starting in 2016. Now here we are 4 years later in the middle of coronavirus and this massive clusterfuck of a response of Western governments as compared to Eastern governments, maybe excluding China, on how horribly they have mishandled this problem. And I am now seeing more and more men on my forums, on my blogs, in my email, and also in casual conversation, like when I talk to guys, saying, you know what, I think I've changed my mind. I think I do want to move out of the United States. Or I think I do want to move out of the UK. Or I think I do want to move out of Germany. Or I think I do want to move away from Canada. I'm getting a lot more of that. So I could now do an entire thing on 5 flags. I won't do that because you can read all about that at the Caleb Jones blog. I would recommend to you to get started, if this is a topic of interest for you, is to Google Caleb Jones blog overview of how 5 flags works. And you can read that article. 5 flags is a reasonably complicated system where you spread out your business, your finances, your income, your citizenships, and your residencies across 3, 4, 5 plus countries. And in doing that, you jack up your freedom into sky high levels and you jack your legal taxes down to teeny tiny microscopic levels. It's really great. It's Alpha Male 2.0 on steroids. I'm not going to describe it all here. It's a little complicated. It doesn't apply to all people, but at least that'll give you a good primer on where to get started. You might not need to do or want to do 5 flags like I'm doing. Instead, you might just want to just move out of your country. And that's fine too. So let's talk about where you might want to go if you want to move out of your own country and how you would live there. And this is a very big topic, so I'm just scratching the surface on this podcast. Again, go to Caleb Jones blog if you want more details on this. If you want a lot more information on this, a lot more specific information, you can join the SMIC program at joinsmic.com. But first, you have to make the decision on where to go. And in order to know where to go, you need to travel a little bit. So maybe you haven't really traveled before, and that's fine. And maybe you've traveled internationally a bit, and you have a pretty good idea of where you want to be. So I will give you my parameters that I have used to select countries where either I'm going to live or spend significant time in a given year, because I'm more of an international lifestyle where I'm not going to live in one place 12 months out of the year. I'm going to have 2 homes, then jacked up to 3 homes in 3 different places and kind of cycle between these places. So for me, I'd look at several different countries where I would quote unquote live part-time in my case. And you'll have to do the same thing. But before I get to the criteria on that, you have to start with what you want, because every guy wants something different. I gave you many examples. I'll give you some easy ones. So years ago, I was on a forum talking about how I wanted to move to Hong Kong. And today I don't want to move to Hong Kong for various reasons, but I certainly am going to spend a lot of time there. I'm going to do a lot of business there. I'm going to be there on a regular basis starting in 2021, several months a year, in fact. It's one of my favorite cities. Matter of fact, it is my favorite place in the world, at least at the moment. That could change with what China is doing, but at the moment, that is my favorite spot in the world. I love Hong Kong. I miss it when I'm not there. And I was talking about how much I love Hong Kong and how I want to move there or spend half the year there or whatever. And this guy commented on my comment, and he basically called me a complete moron and completely stupid. Why the fuck would anyone in their right mind possibly want to go to Hong Kong? Hong Kong sucks. And he didn't specify why, which is common with people on the internet who do that. So I said, well, do you have any actual reasons, any specifics as to why you think Hong Kong sucks? This was a white guy living in Asia. So he actually answered. And he said, oh yeah, Hong Kong is terrible because Thailand is awesome. Thailand is way better. Thailand, people are nicer, women are nicer, people are nicer. Women in Hong Kong are stuck up bitches, what he said. And Hong Kong is expensive and Thailand is cheaper and everyone is nicer and women are better. And that's pretty much what he was talking about. He was talking about how nice people were and the women. Now, what do you think his priorities were? His priorities were getting laid and being social, having lots of friends, fucking lots of girls, and maybe not spending too much money because Thailand is cheaper. That was his objective. Was that my objective? No. Has that ever been my objective? To bang chicks abroad, like Roosh used to do? No, that has never been my objective. Now, that doesn't mean I don't get laid when I travel. Often I do. Sometimes I don't, but often I do. So, because I need to have sex. I'm not going to give that up just because I'm traveling abroad for a few weeks. But I don't go to foreign lands to get laid. That's not my priority. Now, who is right? Was he right or was I right? Should you go abroad to bang women? That's up to you. That's completely up to you. If you want to do that, great. Go ahead and do that. Some of you might want to do that, and that's a great idea. I have no need to do that. I go abroad for business reasons and financial reasons, tax reasons, investment reasons, doing business. And for me, that doesn't mean Thailand necessarily. That means Hong Kong, at least in my world, based on what I want to do. Now, Thailand is a growth country, unlike Hong Kong, but it's not nearly as good of a growth country as the surrounding countries like Cambodia and things like that. I've talked about that in the Caleb Jones blog as well. But if my priority is doing business and having an exciting business financial life, I'm going to pick Hong Kong over Thailand, especially if I don't really give a shit about getting laid, and I don't. I am not a young pickup artist. I don't need to bang 50 women whenever I travel abroad. If I'm somewhere for 2 or 3 months, all I need is 1 or 2 FBs to take care of my sexual needs, and I'm good to go. Can I find 1 or 2 good-looking women in Hong Kong? Yes, I think so. There's 7 million people there. I think I'm good to go. Matter of fact, there are a lot more white women, white, blonde, sexy women in Hong Kong than there are in fucking Thailand. So again, it wouldn't make any sense for me to make Thailand one of my flags, one of my bases, right? Now, it would make perfect sense for him to do that. He probably would be miserable living in Hong Kong, just like I would be miserable, at least bored, living in Thailand. So you've got to go back to what you want, not what other people on the internet advertise or say they want. A lot of guys hear a lot about going to Chiang Mai, Thailand, or going to Medellin, Colombia, because it's so cheap and the women are so hot, right? Now, if your objective is to live somewhere very inexpensively, which is a great objective to have, and to have sex, lots of hot girls more easily than you could in the Western world, which is a perfectly fine objective to have, then great. You would go to Medellin and you'd go to Chiang Mai. If your goal was to hit it hard with business and start a bunch of companies and do a lot of financial international investing, international banking, Medellin is probably not where you want to go, right? Nothing wrong with Medellin, but that's probably not the place you want to go, whereas your buddy who wants to bang chicks and live very cheaply would be a moron if he didn't go to somewhere like Medellin or something like that. You see how this works? So you've got to start with what you want. I see a lot of guys make the mistake of going after places that other men on the internet have talked about as being cool, instead of focusing on what you want as a man. What are your priorities? Now, a lot of that's going to be based on your personality. A lot of that's going to be based on your age. So if you're a 26-year-old guy moving abroad, you're going to have very different objectives than if you're a 55-year-old man moving abroad, especially if you're a 55-year-old man who's already married, right? In my case, and I'm not 55, but I am very married. I'm open married. I'm OLTR married, but I have to factor that in as well. It's not going to just be me spending time abroad. It's going to be my wife spending time abroad, at least a portion of that time also. So I have to factor those things in, which means you also have to factor in your scenarios, your individual scenario, your family life, whether or not you have kids, whether or not you're going to have kids in the future. You need to take into account all of these things. How does that plug in with your long-term plan? Don't just move out of the country to somewhere you heard was cool. That's not very smart. You may go somewhere and fucking hate it because you weren't basing it on your priorities. You were basing it on other men's priorities. Cool? Cool. Okay. Let's talk about the parameters that I used to choose the countries where I would live part-time. And again, I'm not going to live 12 months out of the year in one country. I'm going to live part-time in 2 to 3, and maybe down the road, even 4 countries. Right now, it's just going to be 2.5, I should say, starting next year. And I can't give you a lot of detail as to which countries these are. And I explain that at my blogs because my attorneys and my advisors have told me that I've been blabbing too much about my plans here. And if I keep telling everyone what I'm going to be doing, I could actually reduce the odds of these things actually occurring. So I can't tell you where I'm going, at least in some cases to some degree, until I'm actually settled there. Then I'll tell you, then I won't care because then I'll be there. See how this works? All right. So here are the criteria that I use in terms of, now this is not in terms of where to get passports or where to start businesses or where to have sex with women or where to bank. I'm talking about strictly where to spend time, where to live, quote unquote, even if living to you means you're there for 2 or 3 months and then you go somewhere else. And then maybe you go back in a year for another 2 or 3 months. To me, that's living. Any time frame more than about 30 days on a regular basis, I consider quote unquote living there. If you're just going to be there for a few weeks to visit and never go back there ever again, you're not living there, right? If you visit there for a week, a year, you go to the Bahamas for an annual vacation for a week, and you go there for once a week for a year, that is also not living there. But if you go there 2, 3 months a year, every year, you're living there, in my opinion. So this would be the set of criteria that I used. You are free to copy this. You are free to ignore this. You are free to modify this, again, based on your age and your priorities, okay? First one is, I wanted a country, or countries in my case, that had decent long-term economics, both privately and governmentally. I didn't want to spend a lot of time in a collapsing country. Now, unfortunately, that wipes out just about the entire Western world, with the possible exception of Australia and New Zealand. So Australia and New Zealand, unlike the rest of the West, are very close to Asia. They're very close to China. They benefit from a lot of Chinese and Southeast Asian economic rising. They also do not have the debt that most other Western countries have. So my best guess for Australia and New Zealand is that these countries will not collapse. Instead, they will just stagnate. They'll just kind of sit there where they are for many, many decades, kind of what Japan has done last 20, 30 years. Japan hasn't gone up and it hasn't gone down. It's just kind of sat there like a dead frog floating on the pond. And that's probably what New Zealand and Australia will do. Now, outside of those two countries, the entire Western world, Canada, USA, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Scandinavia, all those countries are going down. They have very shitty long-term economics. Some of them will be okay now. Some of them will be okay for a while. Some of them are in big trouble now, but they're all in trouble long-term. And I didn't want to live in a country that it was on its way out. So that was my first criteria. Second criteria is low odds of war with other neighboring countries and low odds of civil unrest in those countries. There are some countries that are in interesting spots in the world that often go to war, that are often attacked, that often as in historically have problems. There are other countries where people have very high trigger emotional personalities. Brazil, for example, Argentina, for example, and there's a lot of civil unrest occasionally. There's a lot of infighting, that kind of stuff. I didn't want to be in a country where I knew that was a distinct possibility because of either the geographic location of that country or the emotional temperament of people in that country. The next one was low or zero terrorism. And I could do an entire podcast on this if I wanted to get really political, and I don't. But the example I have given is if you look at how terrified the United States is regarding terrorism, how terrified Western Europe is regarding terrorism, do you see any terrorists trying to blow people up in Hong Kong? Do you see terrorists trying to blow people up in Switzerland? In other words, do you see terrorists go after people in countries who mind their own fucking business and don't go around the world poking people in the eye like the United States tends to do, like a lot of countries in Western Europe tend to do? No, they don't. So there's plenty of countries in the world who mind their own goddamn business, who don't really have a terrorism problem at all because they don't instigate and they don't piss off other countries or other terrorists. So I wanted to live in countries that were very safe and very neutral and stayed out of these bullshit conflicts that most of the world likes to embroil themselves in. Number 4, the fourth criteria is I didn't want this country to be too reliant on any other countries with the above set of problems. Now, the perfect example of that would be Canada. And people say to me, well, why do you think Canada is going to collapse? Canada has pretty good banks. Why do you think Canada is going to collapse? Well, you're right. Canada, in terms of the Western world, which is a pretty low bar, has pretty solid banks as compared to other countries in the Western world. The problem is, if America collapses tomorrow morning, what's going to happen to Canada? Canada's fucked. So Canada relies too much on the United States, and you would be surprised if it didn't. It's a regional partner. They share a big, giant border. Of course, it's going to be dependent on that. But if the United States goes tits up, and it will in our lifetimes, Canada's going to be in very, very big trouble, whether or not Canada is well run or not. By the way, Canada is not well run. Canada is further left-wing culturally than most parts of the USA, and that's saying something. There's lots of insane left-wing shit going on in Canada that will increase the speed to their collapse, just like with the United States. Not as bad as the United States, not nearly as bad as Europe, but it will happen. So I wanted to make sure that any place I lived was not reliant upon any major countries that had shitty long-term economics, high odds of going to war, terrorism, and so on. The last criteria I used was this country, or countries in my case, needed to have a climate that I could tolerate. That's a tough one. And it's a really tough one because there are lots of countries I really, really love. And I would love to spend 6 months a year there or more, but their climates are just not something that I can handle. The top of the list in that would be Singapore. I think Singapore is great. Not everything about Singapore I like. There are some aspects about Singapore I don't like. But the things I love about Singapore far outweigh the things I don't like about Singapore. I would very happily live in Singapore. Matter of fact, I would even, under certain conditions, I would even make that my primary home in Singapore. I don't do that. You know why? You know it's coming. I've written about this before. If you've read my blogs for a long time, their climate is so terrible, I want to kill myself. So when I go to Singapore, it is not only hot, it is hot and extraordinarily humid, both at the same time. To the point when you're walking around downtown Singapore, even if you're not dressed in a suit, you're just dressed in a normal shirt, right? Every 10 to 15 minutes, unless you were born there and you're born in some horrible high humid area and you're used to it your whole life, unless you're in that category, if you're just a normal white boy like me from the Pacific Northwest, every 20 minutes or so, you are sweating so bad and you are so hot and miserable, you have to duck into a building and just sit there and cool off in the air conditioning for about 10 minutes and then go back out and continue your walk. It is so horrible there. And it's like that year round. All year it's like that. It's right on the equator and it's in a very humid part of the world. I've been there several times. I love it. But I'm like, at one point I was planning on maybe putting my first or second flag there and I had to cross that off my list because there's just no way I could handle that climate. I just couldn't fucking do it. I think Alaska is beautiful. I love Alaska. But do I want to dick around with, 3 feet of snow for 6 months in a row no, I don't. As much as I love Alaska, I've had family in Alaska. Alaska is one of the most beautiful places in the world. I just can't put up with that bullshit, that climate. Now, you could argue that I could be in Alaska a few months out of the year. Certainly I could do that. You bet. Matter of fact, I'm going to do that with Arizona, specifically Scottsdale, Arizona, where I'm going to be there during the non-summer months where it's really beautiful down there. So I have that freedom. But the point is that climate is a factor. Now, to be clear on this criteria, I say a climate I can tolerate, not a climate I love. I don't have to love the climate. So I am totally in love with Paraguay. I think Paraguay is so great. That's going to be one of my flags. I love Paraguay to death. They have some weird climate down there that I don't like, but I can handle it. It's not a big deal. There are places like Dubai that are very hot, but they're not humid. It's a very dry heat. So I don't mind Dubai's climate at all. I don't mind it. I can handle it. It's fine. It's not the heat. It's the heat plus humidity. So all those aspects together, and it's a tough one because you'll find this out. And if you've traveled a lot internationally, you're probably already aware of this. You'll find places in the world that you just absolutely love, but the climate is so horrible, you just can't do it. So those are my 5 criteria. Feel free to copy those and integrate those into your plan in terms of looking for a new place to live if you want to move out of the country. If you do want to move out of the country, I think that is a noble goal. I agree with that 100%, especially if you live in the Western world, but I will reiterate, you don't have to, as long as you build your Alpha 2.0 business structures, financial structures, and women's structures. I hope this has helped. I will talk to you very soon. Have a good one. Bye.